Let's take you back to our top story, which is about the second edition of the Voice of the Global South Summit. And in terms of what's happened, we've seen Prime Minister Modi addressing them and announcing a Centre of Excellence for the Global South, apart from many other initiatives, and expressing the voice that the Global South needs to find its voice in global governance. It needs to be autonomous as well. There's been a lot of talk of self-reliance as well, and putting in place certain priorities, 10 of them that were enumerated by Prime Minister Modi as well for the Global South to move forward as far as this particular grouping, it's not really a grouping, it's a community really of nations is concerned. Remember the Global South Summit, the first one was called by India earlier in the year, just at the start of the year, to sort of frame the agenda for India's G20 presidency as well, where India wanted to put across what the Global South needs from the developed world in terms of how it wants to move forward in terms of its development and other aspirations. And now there was a stock taking and there was a move forward as well. Let's go across to our guest now. Ambassador J.S. Mukher is joining us, former Sherpa, India's Sherpa, G20 Sherpa, and former senior diplomat as well. Good evening to you. Ambassador Mukher, what do you make of what's happened today in the context of how things have shaped up for the Voice of the Global South, which India is saying that it is, and it is acting on it, it's walked the talk as well after the G20 summit when this particular summit was held?
Well, thank you and namaskar.
Namaskar.
Obviously, the second edition of the Voice of the Global South Summit is a very important development. Frankly, it is in that sense logical. We had held the first summit at the beginning of our presidency, and I think, as you said, we have walked the talk, and therefore, I think at the inaugural, I would like to divide this into two parts. At the inaugural, the Prime Minister outlined what all India had actually done with regard to the Global South during our G20 presidency, culminating in the very successful G20 summit. In his valedictory or concluding session, he outlined the 10 priorities after listening to all the countries, all the views of the Global South, and putting together, he actually spelled out that there were, of course, many priorities, but the top 10 priorities according to him. But the short point, the most important for me is the fact that what the Prime Minister said, that while Global South as a geographical entity has been in existence for long, it is only now that in the changing context of the 21st century, that the Global South is getting a voice. So that, I think, is the main message, but obviously there are details there which we can discuss.
Right. We're also joined by my colleague Jessica Taneja, who has been covering the entire event through the day. Jessica, you saw how the sessions progressed, and you saw how Ambassador Mukher mentioned the valedictory session as well. Excuse me. But in terms of the entire day's proceedings, just tell us what was the voice of the Global South in terms of all those who participated, and how was it reflected in what the Prime Minister had to say at the end of the day?
Well, I lost your voice there a bit, Gautam, but I will pick on the points that you had put out. Well, the Prime Minister in the inaugural session of the Voice of the Global South Summit did speak about the challenges faced by the countries that were earlier ignored, or countries that were at the mercy of other developed nations, especially in terms of supply. There was also an initiative taken by the Prime Minister on developing a young Global South, young forum, fellow forum as well. And of course, the Dakshin that you already spoke about. Various other initiatives and deliberations were taking place, and the Prime Minister was in fact also pointing out that India has walked the talk this time. The priorities taken up of the G20, of the nations, particularly the 125 nations, including the African Union. And those initiatives and deliberations have translated here as well. You saw it in the first Voice for the Global South Summit that was held earlier in January. A lot of initiatives and key issues that have carried forward, especially the 4 Cs that the Prime Minister pointed out: climate action, compatibility, and of course working together on various other initiatives, Gautam.
Right. We seem to be having some sort of an issue with Jessica's audio, but Ambassador Mukher, in terms of the kind of initiatives that have been announced by Prime Minister Modi, one, of course, in the morning itself the Center of Excellence for the Global South, but there are others too. What sort of an indication do they give of the direction that the Global South, and indeed the kind of direction that India wants to give the progress of the Global South?
Well, I think there are a number of initiatives, and already we have mentioned the Dakshin, which was something which we had voiced, Prime Minister had voiced at the first Voice of the Global South Summit, and today it came to fruition with the inauguration of Dakshin, the center, the global South Center of Excellence. So that was one. There was also a mention about bridging the technology divide between North and the South, and especially in terms of the AI and the conference on the AI global conference that is going to be held next month. There were other similar initiatives that were mentioned, number of them. Of course, the most important, which the Prime Minister pointed out, was the historic admission of the African Union, which gave voice to 1.4 billion Africans, an integral and a very important part of the Global South. Then there were references to the SDGs and the development, the sustainable development and the financing of it, a number of areas in which finance, including through the multilateral development bank reforms, so that greater finance is made available to the countries of the Global South. In that context, it was also a reference to climate action and the climate finance, so that both climate finance and technology is made available to the Global South, and so on and so forth. But these, and absolutely, I think again, the message coming through is that India is a trusted partner. India has walked the talk. And I think in the end, what the Prime Minister said was absolutely important. We will remain in communication. This is not the end of the road, it appeared to me, for listening to him, and we will continue to be in communication on this particular aspect. So perhaps that is something, well, of course, you can be in communication bilaterally, of course, with countries, but I think we could also look at further editions of the Global South Summit, because he said the Global South dialogue will continue.
Right. Now, in terms of how this Global South, not just the term came up, but how this community has moved forward, how do you assess it really in terms of the aspirations of the members of the countries, considering that the Global South is a bit amorphous, it's not completely clearly defined. It's basically a developing countries, but there are countries in its midst that are considered to be developed as well.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is no strict rule. Today, there was reference to 100+ countries. India's development partnership with the Global South encompasses almost 160 countries as part of our development partnership or ITEC program. So yes, there could be different opinions. But the basic thing is not just the number of countries, but it's the commonality or similarity of their priorities, of their interests, of their concerns. I think that is important, and that I think is what India was trying to tell them, that in the G20, through these 200+ meetings, we took on board your concerns at the beginning, and we have voiced these, and many of these interests and priorities have gained consensus as part of the G20 summit declaration.
Can you tell us, Ambassador, that at the end of the second Global South Summit, can there still be any discussion, debate, or even dispute about the leadership of the Global South?
Well, there is no, again, as you said, it's an amorphous group, so there is nothing like a defined leader. But yes, from all aspects, India is one of the leading members of the Global South, both in terms of its standing, stature, leadership, what it is showing, as also with regard to the priorities and interests and concerns. On both these counts, I think India is there at the top, front and center of the Global South.
Yes, certainly that can be safely concluded today in terms of what's happened and the kind of path that India has charted out for the Global South as well, because it is distinct from the path charted out by some other nations that also claim to be leaders of the Global South. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about it, Ambassador Mukul.